tonight. A threat assessment by the Justice, Crime Prevention and Security Cluster Ministers shows South Africa is relatively stable and that conditions are conducive for free and fair elections next week. It was revealed during a briefing on the state of readiness ahead of next Monday's municipal elections. For more on this, we're joined by criminologist in the Department of Political Science at Stellenbosch University, Dr. Guy Lamb, the Police Prisons Civil Rights Union spokesperson, Richard Mamabolo, and Dr. Johan Berger, who is a consultant with the Institute for Security Studies. Good evening to all of you gentlemen, and thank you for your time tonight. Dr. Lamb, let me begin with you. You know, we have a situation here where this cluster of ministers effectively came out today to say to South Africans, there's nothing to worry about in as far as safety and security is concerned. We should be fine, and this election should go off seamlessly. And yet at the same time, we know that there are all of these incidents of violence, these hotspots of violence in the country. What do you think in terms of the preparations that are being made and the extent to which that will have an impact on everybody in this country being able to have a free and fair election?
Well, I mean, the situation is, we've had a number of elections within South Africa, certainly since 1994. They've all gone off relatively well. All of those elections have been free and fair. We haven't had any major incidences. Obviously, what the concern in everyone's mind is what happened in July, particularly in many parts of KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng, and sort of their concerns that there may be a repeat of that. But, in the case of South Africa, it's unlike a number of other countries where the democratic space is fairly open and it's contestable and it's free and fair within South Africa. It is the elections create the opportunity for those to try and acquire some power and kind of in local spaces. So in terms of a threat to the election, certainly from a kind of a major perspective point of view or kind of major threats, that's certainly not significant. We may see in certain areas and certain wards where there may be elements that want to disrupt those sort of elections. So it was quite encouraging to hear that from the Security and Justice Cluster that they were looking at certain hotspots. They were going to have a hotspot-orientated response to this, so there would be more security, obviously, where there are the greatest risk of kind of threats and violence happening. But certainly the terrain that South Africa's in is nothing significantly has changed since 1994. We're still, a society that has levels of violence, but yet we're able to pull together elections and get them to a stage where they're free and fair.
Richard, the ministers also spoke about the fact that we would have the presence of law enforcement at each and every station, effectively, voting station that this country has. During the registration weekend, the final registration weekend, we did see some communities try and shut down stations and prevent communities from coming out to register to vote. Are you anticipating at all that that's part of what your members will have to deal with on voting day?
No, not at all, really. I think the assessment that was made by the securities cluster is quite accurate. And the good thing about elections is that they are not sporadic. They are actually structured. So there is sufficient time to obviously look into any expected challenges that might occur. And of course, this is something that the cluster is looking into on a daily basis. We're also excited about the fact that throughout this process, there has been engagement, and of course, all clusters included, especially those within the criminal justice cluster. We think that the identified voting stations, which are over 23,000, will have sufficient capacity in terms of the deployments of members of the SAPS to actually ensure that all these areas, during the day of elections, of course, have got a smooth running. There are only about 300 identified hotspots out of all this, and of course there is sufficient time to ensure that in all these areas there are certain measures that are taken up in ensuring that these areas do become people can actually go out and vote peacefully.
Let's talk about some of these hotspot areas. Dr. Berger, you have some in KwaZulu-Natal, in Gauteng, the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. Those are the provinces that are really topping the list in terms of where those hotspot areas have been identified. Is it a fair list in as far as the issues that have come up leading to this election?
Well, it could be. We know KwaZulu-Natal has created a number of problems as far as violence, political violence, and other forms of violent crime is concerned. And of course, some areas in the Western Cape, the same thing. And the same goes for Gauteng and the Eastern Cape. It shows up in the crime statistics in relation to violent crime as well. And I think, as Guy has pointed out, KwaZulu-Natal is a huge concern, especially after what happened in July this year. And the police are, I think they are correct in terms of highlighting KwaZulu-Natal as perhaps the number one concern. Now, as Richard also pointed out, I think what they've done, and they do this with each and every election, and this is the one thing we've done right so far since 1994. We have the structures in place, the coordinating structures in terms of security operations of this kind. And although we were not very good with the intelligence gathering situation during July, it looks like the intelligence system is up and running as far as the elections and this operation is concerned. So I think keeping in mind that of the just over 23,000 voting stations, as Richard pointed out, only just over 300 were identified as high-risk stations. So the police need to have a presence at each and every one of the 23,000 voting stations. But in some areas where there's a higher risk, they will have to have a higher presence. And they will have to have reserve forces in place. And I think this is where they have activated the South African National Defence Force in support. And this time they've done it right. In July, there was a lot of violence already happening, and then they had to start mobilizing the SANDF. So they had them on standby already. And so we have concentrated forces in areas of high concern. And given the fact that more than 19,000 voting stations would probably be extremely peaceful, I think the police, with the assistance of the other forces, would be able to ensure security and to react very, very quickly should there be incidents, because incidents will happen. And it always happens with all the elections, in spite of all the security measures, but they are more or less controllable incidents.
Dr. Lamb, the issue of the July riots has been referenced quite a number of times. And when one looks at part of what that did, is that it left the criminal, cluster very exposed. And South Africans, by and large, were able to see the weaknesses of the system, and perhaps some of those behind the violence also understanding it and taking advantage of it in terms of perpetuating that violence over a number of days, at least in some areas. Are there particular risk factors that you believe government should be looking into right now? I heard Dr. Berger talking about the crime intelligence and the kind of information that could well be coming out of there, but even that came under severe scrutiny in July.
What happened in July was really an unanticipated event on the part of certainly the intelligence structures. I mean, I think others who were monitoring it anticipated that something was going to happen, but certainly I don't think it was expected at the level that it was going to happen. So that was, almost a unique event. What's happening here is an election. We know the mechanics of it. We know the logistics of it. So it's something that the police can plan for. And obviously, one of having that incident a few months ago within KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng, there was sort of a wake-up call for many elements within the security cluster in the sense of ensuring that doesn't happen again. And in this kind of sense is what the sort of groups and forces and networks that came together around that aren't as active and potent as they were back in July. But also there's kind of more to gain out of the elections than to gain by trying to disrupt them. But if you're asking an issue around risk factors, you may see in a number of areas, in the hotspot areas, the police have identified, maybe in others, that there's certain groups or factions who felt that they were disempowered or marginalized during the list process, so their candidates didn't get on and may look to try and disrupt certain ward elections. We may see that happening. We certainly haven't got the situation we saw in the sort of 1990s, early 2000s, where there was a lot of tension, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, between the ANC and the IFP, and that sort of intimidation that was around that. We don't have that as such an extent anymore. But it's not to say that we may see in certain areas where there's sort of tension and a lot of disgruntlement about how lists were compiled. You may see groups trying to disrupt processes, but it certainly will be quite localized.
Richard, in terms of coordination and being able to roll out an effective strategy, even if it is making sure that the assigned police officers in a particular province actually show up at the station where they intended to, do you believe that some of the challenges facing the police management at the top will have any kind of bearing on how the SAPS is able to streamline some of its core services during this period?
Look, I don't think so. In fact, I think, of course, the criminal justice cluster has been met with a lot of challenges which are mostly internal, which definitely need to be dealt with. I think Dr. Berger would obviously have a further understanding on that. But the main thing is that for now, as this election is structured, we do not anticipate any challenges. Again, the responsibility of ensuring that the elections are free and fair should also be based upon what different political parties have committed themselves to. You remember that on the 1st of October, all parties signed the electoral code of conduct, wherein they are expected to also ensure that even within these different stations, their members are there, their representatives are there, in ensuring that whatever challenges that are obviously picked up could be addressed immediately without them having to create a situation where voters might not be comfortable in such areas. So really we think that the plan is quite good, and there are no really anticipated challenges that are foreseeable now.
Dr. Berger, let me then give you an opportunity to wrap this conversation up.
Yes, thanks, Kathy. Richard is completely right. I think, the operational structures that the police have been using since 1995 have been tested over and over again with all kinds of major events, and the elections count as one of those major events. So they have the operational coordinating structures, the so-called joint operational and intelligence structure, right down to local level. They have the operational concepts, and all of those are well tested and well proven structures and concepts, and it works well. And I think the level where these operations will be conducted and coordinated, you won't have any impact as far as the battles in the top leadership of the police is concerned. These members have been around long before all of these battles started and happened, and they will just continue with their jobs at local level. So yes, I'm as confident as the other two gentlemen that the structures that we have in place, the experience that we've built up over the years, and the operational concepts that will be applied, all of those have proven to be successful, and I'm convinced that they will be successful this time around again.
Let me thank you all for your time tonight. Criminologist Dr. Guy Lamb, POPCRU spokesperson Richard Mamabolo, and the ISS's Dr. Johan Berger.